started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum, organized by the MIT Mobile Initiative. This is the session 151, and we have an exciting panel today discussing the safety of our streets. Before I formally start the session, I do introduce the forum a little bit and reinform the norm of this forum. Unlike most online forums, only speakers talk and the audience just be silent. We explicitly encourage all of the audience to contribute at least one idea throughout the discussion. Because the setting is impossible for everyone to orally speak, so we encourage the audience to type your thought into the chat, right? Either a comment or a question to our panelists today, right? So that's the main expectation here. Second one is whenever you can, please turn on your video. So the general expectation is video on, audio off. So from the speaker point of view, it's very awkward to talk to a vacuum, right? But if you see a group of smiley faces, it's just much more exciting to have a more meaningful conversation here. So for today's topic, safety of our streets, we'll ask three questions. The first one is, how does our car-first engineering mindset undermine our community safety? Question number two, what are the myths and the pseudoscience behind US road design? And three, what's the Vision Zero's system-based approach to ending traffic fatality? So those are three questions. We have a fantastic panel, Marohn, Marshall, and Shahum joining us to really elaborate and answer those questions. Marohn designed today's session, will host this. But before that, I want to ask each of the panelists one question. By end of this session, what are the tangible things our audience will get out of this? Give a 30-second answer to that question, right? Wes, do you want to start? Yes.
Well, we'll have to see how it goes, but I would say one of the fundamental things I want to get across is that the tens of thousands of people that die on the road each year in this country, or the 1.3 million around the world, it's not the cost of doing business. It's something that has happened, and it's a choice that we're making by allowing it, by not doing the sort of things we'll be talking about today. So there are steps we can forge ahead with to get better in this way, and fundamental, simple things that we're overlooking.
Nice. It's our choice. Thank you, Wes. Chuck.
I want to show people that neighborhoods that are walkable and bikeable are not like little sideshows to the economic story of our cities. They're actually like the core of what makes good financial investments. And if we want our cities to be financially strong and successful, we'll stop building highways and auto-based infrastructure, and we'll lean into the things that make neighborhoods walkable, bikeable, and prosperous places to live.
Wonderful. Walking, cycling at the core to our economic vitality. Lee? Yeah.
First, on a very practical level, I hope everyone leaving this session today will use the phrase crash, not accident. On a bigger level or longer term, I hope folks will see themselves in the change that's possible and go out and get involved if they're not already.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now let me give the floor to Buva. Please.
Thank you, Genoa. So the idea for this panel came about earlier this summer when, after much delay, I completed reading both Confessions of a Recovering Engineer and Killed by a Traffic Engineer. I have the books with me. I don't want to review the books right now, but I'd highly recommend it for the planning and transportation folks. And we have like 370 people, and I know a lot of you are in this space, especially in the US, very, very relevant. While I personally was aware of some of it, like how engineers often prioritize car traffic speed and volume rather than safety and cost and values that are totally misaligned with the community needs, it was fascinating to learn about the history behind a lot of these guidelines and these metrics, design priorities, and the financial incentives that have shaped the system that we have today. So I hope that over the course of this session, we can briefly touch upon why America's transportation system is failing to deliver these safe streets, livable streets, and then move on to more positive aspects such as the practical strategies for change, from engineering reform to community-led initiatives and policy advocacy. So we'll start off with a quick 8-minute presentation from each of our speakers here, and then move to a discussion, and then last 10 minutes audience Q&A. So we'll start off with Wes. So Wes, while you're getting your screen, I'll just quickly introduce you. Wes Marshall is a professor of civil engineering at the University of Colorado, Denver, where he holds a joint appointment in urban planning. Wes is also a licensed professional engineer and focuses on transportation teaching and research dedicated to creating safer and more sustainable transportation systems. He's the author of the 2024 book, Killed by a Traffic Engineer, and has more than 80 peer-reviewed journal publications and book chapters in his name. He's also a native of Watertown, Massachusetts, right in our backyard, and he's a graduate of the University of Virginia and the University of Connecticut, MS and PhD. Over to you, Wes.
All right, no, thank you for that, and thanks for everyone for coming, and for the other panelists. I'm excited to see what they have to say as well. And given that we only had like 6 minutes, and now I guess we have 8, I couldn't really go into a lot of the history as to like why some of our the protocols, the methods, like our standard practice for traffic engineering is not steeped in the science that we think it is, that we were taught. So I want to do something a little bit more fundamental. So when engineers look at what we consider the 3 E's of traffic safety that you see here, and they proceed to essentially ignore engineering as a solution to our safety problems. So as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, it reminded me of a story I was actually telling Chuck last week when he was in town. And it goes back to right when my book came out. So let me set the stage for you, starting with ITE, which, if you don't know, it's the main professional organization for traffic engineers. ITE stands for the Institute of Transportation Engineers. It's been around for, I think, 95 years, since 1930 or so. And if you're a member of ITE, you can participate in what most of us call the ITE Forum, which is kind of like a Reddit webpage where people are bringing up professional topics. And back when my book came out, so this is summer 24, somebody posted this asking if anybody has read it and looking for a book review. The first response was somebody saying that it hit home, and they referenced the first interview that I did for the book with David Zipper, who is a senior fellow with the MIT Mobility Lab. And after taping our new podcast yesterday, I actually asked them what that means. So now I know what that position really means. Anyway, the third person said this: it's hard to get past the title, which I think is fair, but that they'll read it anyways, because it's always good to have feedback on what we're doing. And they want to know if what we do is really based on old assumptions or real science. Finally, I came across someone that had actually read it. Well, they'd read half of it, and they had a lot of really nice things to say. Although they did say that Strong Towns interviewed me, which wasn't true at all, but now I can actually say that is true. We talked last week. Anyways, there was also a vocal minority of people posting and going very hard in the other direction, not only refusing to read my book, but also trying to make sure that nobody else did. Like, their big point is, like, don't blame the traffic engineers, it's the drivers, it's driving behavior. Like, that's the problem. And to be fair, if you look at our crash data, it says the exact same thing, that human error is the biggest cause of the problem. And this guy also blamed Chuck as well. So in addition to the drivers, he went in that direction. So if the thinking is that we have this massive human error problem, you can see why we focus more on the education and enforcement instead of, even as engineers, we don't focus on engineering. And I'm not disagreeing that it would be really nice to see some improvement in road user behaviors. At the same time, if you look at every city that does one of these high injury network maps, like this one in Denver, where you're seeing like 50, 60, or 70% of your severe injuries and fatalities happening on 5, 6, or 7% of your city's streets, the ones that we put those 95 years of traffic engineering science and knowledge directly into are the ones that are killing people. Like in Denver, Federal Boulevard is the worst of the worst. And this is Federal right here, which is literally just a 10-minute walk this way from where I'm standing right now. And that's the Colorado DOT you see in the right of the photo. So not long ago, 2 pedestrians died at this crosswalk right here in front of CDOT by a speeding driver. And here I am crossing the intersection, almost getting killed by a bus driver with a permissive left turn that's waving at his fellow bus driver coming down the hill instead of giving me the right of way. But if you look at our data, you're going to see that this is like a speeding crash, right? So what do we do in a case like this? We put up signs like this, and you see signs like this up and down Federal Boulevard. But given like the built environment that we put in front of drivers in a city like Denver, this is city proper, of course people are speeding. And I use my own radar gun to find this car you see right there was going over 70 miles per hour in a 35. And this is an area with a lot of transit riders, a lot of pedestrians, many of which are kids. And it's also a place where other people have died before, I mean, including those right in front of that same CDOT building. But the driver that killed those pedestrians was coming off of this ramp here and coming from this street, which is below Federal. And you can see this is a 30-mile-an-hour street. And it's clearly designed for at least double that. So given that, and given where that off-ramp, on-ramp is, there was literally only 100 feet between there and where these pedestrians were. And for a stopping sight distance of 100 feet, I think I calculated you have to be going like 26 miles per hour. And it's also downhill. So when you think about this, like, this isn't an error. They're doing what these roads were designed for. Even if I flip to the other side where that on-ramp is up the hill, like I see this guy in a walking boot, he thought he was good, but he had to start running when he noticed how fast this car was coming up that hill. And if this guy didn't run and instead got hit, we'd blame this on human error and try to fix it with education and enforcement. But to me, we should be treating every fatal and severe crash as if there's something we could do to fix it with engineering. And if you look back at that guy that seems to hate me in my book and a little bit of Chuck too, his big point was that the wrong way drivers, like on highways, represent the epitome of the human error problem. Like, what the hell as we as engineers could possibly do about these people? It is human error all the way. How could we be responsible even if that thing is increasing? And one example of this is the Legacy Parkway north of Salt Lake City. It's one of those highways with a lot of one-way crashes. And to the Utah DOT's credit, they tried to fix it with engineering. So they used our standard engineering protocols to fix this problem. They did a speed study and they found out most drivers were going much faster than the speed limit. So they raised the speed limit from 55 to 65, saying that the speed limit would eliminate the safety risk on this highway. And guess what? They saw an 82% increase in wrong way drivers. So they went back to what we always do, and they put some ads out telling, like this one where this kid is basically blaming their dad for them being dead and the fact that we can't achieve Vision Zero on account of this father not paying enough attention. But if we treat this crash like there is possibly something we could do with engineering, we might not fix things entirely, but we can head in the right direction. Like Denver, for instance, has this problem, and you can see what they did here. You can see that we have a green straight arrow indicating the driver should be going straight instead of using the green ball right where that ramp is. So instead of the driver maybe thinking they should be taking a right there, that green arrow might give them a little bit more of an indication that we should be doing something different in that instance. So there always is going to be some sort of engineering solution, but we can never do that if we don't think we have a problem. There's the contingent of engineers that doesn't want to hear this, and they doesn't want you to read my book or Chuck's. Like, in fact, my book's been banned by several state DOTs. And I would say by sticking their heads in the proverbial sidewalk, engineers are almost proving my point. So speaking of sidewalks, to finish up here, I recently walked past, when I was walking up and down Federal, I saw like a stamp in the ground. So, this is laid by this guy. It's over 60 years old, and the sidewalk's in perfect shape. And it got me thinking that maybe there's something to be said about putting your name on your work. It helps you take more pride in your work. And as I walked up and down Federal, it got me thinking, like, what if traffic engineers also put their name on the streets that they designed? And when I was walking on this most dangerous street in Colorado, I saw my name in big letters. And I thought to myself that if, I wouldn't want to put my stamp on a drawing like this. I would not want to put my stamp on a road like this that we know is the most dangerous in the city. So maybe if we also make engineers put their name on their streets, that they can start doing better. But we can do better, but we need to start by rethinking our crash data. It's more fundamental than just forging ahead with our standard engineering protocols. Like, we have to rethink things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wes. And I know you talk about the FAST database and some of the deficiencies in that in your book. But yeah, Chuck, if you can get your slides on, I'll quickly just introduce you. So Chuck is the founder and president of Strong Towns, a North American movement dedicated to helping our cities, towns, and neighborhoods become financially strong and resilient. After his bachelor's in civil engineering and master's in urban and regional planning, both from the University of Minnesota, Chuck served as a city engineer for multiple small towns in central Minnesota, managing a wide range of public infrastructure projects that gave him a deep appreciation of how cities function and how they too often pursue infrastructure investments that undermine his undermine long-term financial stability. So this led to the founding of Strong Towns, and his second book in the Strong Town series is Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, which focuses on the transportation for a strong town. Over to you, Chuck. You're still on mute.
I am. That's a rookie mistake that I shouldn't have made. Thank you for the invite, and thank you also for the kind introduction. I'm going to chat a little bit about stuff out of my first book and make the case for walking and biking as a financial investment. This is my hometown. It's actually pouring down rain outside like I've never seen it pour. So this is like 3 blocks from where I'm sitting here today. This is what my hometown looked like in the 1800s. Over time, my town evolved the way that cities have evolved over thousands of years. It grew incrementally. It grew incrementally up, incrementally out, and would thicken up in place until by the time you get to just before the Great Depression, those original little pop-up shacks have been replaced by these buildings of brick and granite. This is a development pattern that we see around the world. This is a completely different city. At some point, you might recognize it here, but really, every city that's ever been built prior to the Great Depression, prior to this kind of new experiment we've been doing since the end of World War II, have been built in this same kind of incremental way. This, of course, is Times Square. Cities big, cities small, cities of all sizes in between, grew in an organic way. Think of a culture growing in a petri dish, incrementally out, incrementally up, and thickening up and maturing in the process. At the end of World War II, we were freaked out about going back into the Great Depression. There were a whole bunch of logical reasons for people who had lived through the Depression, lived through the war, to fear that when they demobilized all these industries and brought home all these troops, that things were just not going to be different. And they were going to find themselves deep in hardship again. Of course, that's not what happened. What happened is we turned cities into machines of growth. We pumped into them subsidies for highways, for regional transportation, for local roads. We created a secondary market for housing and pumped lots of money and capital into building housing across the nation. We built infrastructure and lots of other things to stimulate growth at the local level, turning cities into, again, these machines of growth. This was wildly successful, right? In the couple decades after World War II, our GDP grew dramatically while our federal debt hardly grew at all. And this allowed us to correct the major imbalance in debt to GDP ratio that we had coming out of the Great Depression and World War II. If you listen to the story of growth today in this country, it's really predicated on this experience after World War II, this wildly successful period of time where we were able to grow our way out of debt, grow our way out of our economic troubles. I want to show you what this looks like on the ground. This is a map of Fresno, California. And if you look at Fresno, the yellow box there is what its boundaries were like in 1897. And I'm going to show you how this changes over time. Here's 1909, 1922. Here's the Great Depression. And here's the end of World War II. You see the city growing incrementally over time. That traditional development pattern, that pre-Great Depression development pattern that we see around the world. Now here in North America, brand new experiment, brand new way of growing after World War II. Here's what this looks like. 1958, 1970, here's 83, here's 95, and the last map I have is 2010. A dramatically different development pattern. The city as a machine of growth. In my little hometown here, we're the same population today that we were at the end of World War II, but we're 10 times the size. If we think that through and we look at that growth project, we recognize really quickly that we can create a lot of transactions. In other words, it's very easy in our economy when we pump money into infrastructure, when we pump money into growth and development, for us to grow very, very quickly. The question that I think a more sophisticated society would ask, and the question that we've been kind of toiling on here at Strong Towns for a decade and a half, is what is the return on those investments? Where do we get the most financial productivity? What neighborhoods are actually the most prosperous? These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. In fact, right up the street that way, a couple blocks, you'll find this little area. In the 1920s, this was the far edge of town. And so you can imagine these places growing incrementally out on the edge. The buildings on the left here are what that looked like in the 1920s. Of course, When these were built in the 20s, you then had the Great Depression, you had World War II, and then you had cities as a growth machine. The development pattern just skipped right over this entire neighborhood and started building hyper out on the edge, based on the automobile, based on a new pattern, a new way of building. We have labeled this area blight. And the block on the right used to look just like the block on the left. We got it torn down, and now we have a brand new kind of modern style of neighborhood development. We have a Taco John's, and I recognize that we have people around the world who maybe don't know Taco John's. I like to describe Taco John's as Norwegian Mexican food. That's what you have here in the block on the right. In my city, we were thrilled about this, right? We got rid of blight. We got something on the right that not only is not considered blighted, but meets all of our codes and regulations. It's got plenty of parking, plenty of, the sign ordinance is correct. They've got ADA compliant bathrooms and commercial sprinkler systems. The building on the right meets all of our objectives, except nobody bothered to look. That block on the left has a total value of 1.1 million. That block on the right, which is the same size and area, the same amount of public infrastructure investment, the same amount of long-term cost for the city for service and maintenance, is only worth 600,000. This is a pattern that we see repeated over and over again in cities across North America. I'm going to show you some work from a group called Urban 3 that plots up financial productivity. What parts of our cities are the most financially productive? Where do you get the highest value per acre? And in city after city, this is Buffalo, New York. In city after city, what we see is that those pre-Great Depression neighborhoods are the places where we have all the productivity, all the wealth, all the high returning investments. This is true regardless of city size. The crew at Urban 3 has modeled cities that are huge, cities that are small, cities are in between, cities that are on water, cities that are not, cities that are northern, are southern, are on interstates, are off interstates. Every place we see the same pattern repeated over and over, where we have pre-Great Depression development patterns, neighborhoods that are walkable, neighborhoods that are designed to be walkable, even when they no longer are walkable. They financially outperform by a wide margin everything that we've built subsequent. They are storages of wealth, even when they are occupied by the poorest people in the community, even when they are experiencing lots of decline and neglect. The takeaway from this is that these neighborhoods that have largely been overlooked, they're not places where we get rapid growth. They're the places where we get wealth, are actually the places we need to shift our focus to. When we go to these neighborhoods and we look at them, what we see is that because we have focused on rapid growth around the automobile for really 3 generations now, we have overlooked all of the opportunities to make these neighborhoods not only more livable, but actually squeeze a lot of value out of them. And the investments we have to make are actually really simple to do. At Strong Towns, we set up a 4-step process for cities to identify the lowest risk, highest returning investments that they can make. And I'll share a link to this 4-step process in the chat here when I'm done. It's very simple. Humbly observe where people struggle. Go out and ask yourself the question, what's the next smallest thing we can do to address that struggle? Go do that thing, do it right now, and then repeat the process over and over. Because what we have found more clearly than anything else is that the highest returning investments we can make today are very small. They're built around people biking, they're built around people walking, they're built around neighborhood investment, corner stores, backyard cottages, all the things that thicken up and in a sense make better use of the existing infrastructure that we've already built and committed to maintaining. There's a lot of young engineers who are going into the practice today, thinking that they're going to build big bridges and big highways and big expansive things. We don't have the money to do that. Our cities are broke. What we need to do, and I think the challenge for the next generation of engineers is, how do we go back and make better use of what we've already built? And if you're going to do that, the answer is biking, walking, slowing down traffic, and making our neighborhoods safer, better places to live.
Thanks, Chuck. That was fascinating. On the note of what we need to do and what we can do, I'll move to you, Leah. So as you get your screen share on, I'll quickly introduce you. Leah is the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network, spending over 2 decades championing movements to advance safe, healthy, and active transportation. She serves on the steering group of the National Road to Zero Coalition, as well as the advisory board of the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety at the University of North Carolina. As a German Marshall Fund Fellow, Leah researched Vision Zero strategies in Sweden, Germany, and Netherlands. And prior to that, she served as the executive director of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, leading significant change on the streets and in the policies of this leading Vision Zero city. So with that, are you having problems with your screen share or?
No, I'm just going to start old school. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Leah Shahum with the Vision Zero Network. I am going to start with what I am not. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a professional transportation planner. I am someone who knows a lot of people, unfortunately, too many people who have been killed or seriously injured in traffic crashes. And I would venture to guess a lot of people on this call have the same experience. Whether you're coming at this professionally, thank you for the work you do, or you're coming at this personally, I would imagine most of us know too many people who've been killed or severely injured in traffic crashes. And I am going to now share my screen and hope this works okay. Just to mention a few that move me or that I want to share. Hopefully folks can see that okay. I want to mention from left, going clockwise here, Judy's daughter, Ella, who was killed in a crash. I want to mention Joe's son, Paul, in Fresno, who was killed by a crash. To the far right, Amy's son, Sammy, who was killed in a crash in New York City. And on the bottom corner left is Michelle's son, who was killed, Connor, who was killed in a crash in Portland. I say all this because this is what motivates me. I am not someone who, until recently, knew what the level of service meant. And when I found out, I was shocked. I could not believe it did not stand for level of safety. Honestly, I'm being dead serious here. I'm also someone who was shocked to learn that our country did not have a national roadway safety strategy until about 3 years ago. Thank you to the then DOT leaders. I won't go on and on about the things I'm shocked about because they are many, but that's what motivates me. So I am someone who has been very informed, and I'm going to hold them up by the other two panelists. Thank you, Wes and Chuck, for the great work you do. And a lot of people on this call and MIT, you all are, I think, exposing a big dirty secret about how unsafe our streets are. This phrase, I think, says a lot. These are crashes. They are not accidents. This has nothing to do with individual blame, nothing to do, though that's important, of course, but this has to do with how we design our systems, how we design our vehicles, how we set up our policies and legal systems. If there's one thing I ask you today, it's to switch your language from accident to crash, because these are not random, they're not unpredictable, they are preventable. And what I'm doing and what Vision Zero Network is doing, I should say who we are. Let me go back. Vision Zero Network is a small nonprofit started 10 years ago, and we are basically rabble rousers. We are not quote unquote transportation professionals, but we are people who basically think enough is enough of the current system. And we help support and organize people across this country at the local level to demand the goal of Vision Zero. What is Vision Zero? It is the absolutely radical idea that we should all be safe on our streets, whether you're driving, walking, biking, in a wheelchair, in a scooter, on a motorcycle. That radical idea that we should all be safe while moving around our communities. Of course, that's not radical, and I am being facetious. I'm not going to have time to go through too much of this, but I do want to share, and I encourage people to check out more online. We'll share more in the chat. I had a big aha moment when I learned that other countries were doing dramatically better than the US when it comes to road safety. In fact, according to the Centers for Disease Control's very recent study, which has now been somewhat buried, but we'll share it in the link. The Centers for Disease Control studied 28 high-income nations, so similar to the US, situated like the US. The US ranks dead last, far last, not just a little bit, far last, far worst in traffic death rates among 28 other high-income nations. Please check out this CDC study. Please share it. It is, again, pretty shocking. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I encourage you to look online. Part of what Vision Zero and what's called the safe systems approach, which thank you, you guys have been referring to, and you both describe well in many ways in your books and technical ways. With Vision Zero, we're kind of stepping back and saying, let's just take it back to basics. Let's keep it simple. No matter how you get there, you know, what tools you use, and let me say there are lots of tools, we'll get to that, but let's just start with the basics. Traffic deaths are preventable, and people are going to make mistakes. Let's integrate that in. Let's integrate inevitable human failing into our work. Let's assume people will sometimes have sun in their eyes while driving. Let's assume sometimes people make bad choices, because we do. Shocker, but we do. How do we now design systems and policies and street designs that account for that, or at least make a inevitable crash less severe? I'm not going to go into all these, but really thinking about how do we do that. Jumping to the positive, I want to give credit to the many, many planners and engineers and policymakers and advocates, some of whose names I recognized in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you, who are already doing this, who are making change. It's not brand new. I don't want to pretend like, you know, safety is a new concept. It's not a new concept, obviously. But what I think is evolving and emerging in the US, thanks to, again, leaders on this call and others, is that locals in Montgomery County, in Milwaukee, and in Austin, Texas, just to name a few, I'm not going to read all these stats, but just to name a few, planners, engineers, policymakers, mayors, city council members, advocates are saying enough is enough. I'm not going to design only based on level of service. I am going to add that, say, traffic calming circle, that roundabout. I am going to lower speed limits to 20 miles per hour. That's not what the book tells me I should do, engineering book, whatever that was called. But I'm going to do this because this is the thing that will keep people safest. A couple more examples. Kudos, Madison. Kudos, New Braunfels, Texas. Kudos, Santa Rosa, which is near where I live, doing a great job. And I'm highlighting just a few. This is, you know, of course, many, many more. But what I want to highlight here is that we know what works. This is not rocket science. People way smarter than me, most of you on this call, know how to do this. What's getting in your way, if I can speak bluntly, is lack of political will and lack of public demands. So that is what we are aiming at Vision Zero Network to really ramp up, to show, hey, this works when you do it. Now we've got to scale this up. And I'll highlight Santa Rosa for a second. Very suburban community, I think about 200,000 people, Northern California. And not only are they doing, I would call small scale projects like this, I highlight this, it was a pilot, I should say it was a pilot project where they reduced one travel lane, turned it into a more of a pickup drop off and mixed use lane near an elementary school to help slow and calm traffic. They saw a 14% decrease in vehicle speeds. Why does that matter? Because for every 1% mile per hour you reduce, it's estimated that you have a 5% drop in traffic deaths. We'll share that study if we don't have it handy, but I'm sure I'm not saying that in a professional way, but you get the point. I'm going to move on and say kudos to places like Hoboken, New Jersey, for those that say it's not possible. Hoboken, city of about 50,000 people, as you probably know, has gone 8 years now, and I'm knocking on wood, with zero traffic deaths. And I want to give credit where credit's due. It's not that Hoboken did anything magical. It's not that Hoboken had tons more money than anyone. What Hoboken did, and what communities across the country are doing, I want to give credit, this is not just Hoboken, but they are showing political courage. And I want to read and give credit to the mayor of Hoboken. Implementing bold action through Vision Zero is tough work. It requires political courage and facing our challenges head on, knowing that saving lives is worth fighting for. So Hoboken is implementing what works faster, citywide, and saving lives, period. Here's our information. We hope you will follow up. Vision Zero Network is a small nonprofit. We benefit from support like lots of you. Come volunteer, support us, get involved, join our monthly e-news. And thank you guys so much for this opportunity. I'll hand it back.
Thank you, Leah. So I'm going to jump right into the discussion and the Q&A because there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to discuss here. So as an engineer, probably I'll just start off with the engineering questions first. So looking at you, Wes and Chuck. We often say that, we had like 42,915 deaths, I think in 2022, and a slightly lower figure last year. If that 43K figure goes to 50,000, nobody gets penalized. If that figure falls to 30,000, nobody gets rewarded. So, there's this, are the incentives misaligned? And what is the right answer to engineers saying that, hey, we are just doing our job and following the guidelines? This is what's in the book. I'm just doing my job. So is there an answer there? Is it an incentive problem? Is it a rules problem? And I'm just trying to figure out, as an engineer, not a civil engineer, but yeah, I would just like to hear that from. Are you pointing to Wes, Chuck?
Well, Wes actually, I think, has the best way of thinking about this that I have heard, and it really expanded my mind. So yes, I'm pointing to Wes.
Well, I'm not sure which exactly point you're thinking about, but what I would say here is I think
death per VMT to me is like
yeah,
that's the way we measure success, right?
You're right. I mean, I think we're optimizing the wrong variables, and that's a good one. Yeah, same with level of service or things like that. But we measure safety in a way where there's two ways to get better safety. One is reduce fatalities. The other is to drive more. And the more we all drive, the safer we all seem. And we're building our places based on that thinking that more driving equates to better safety, and it doesn't. So, like there was even a TRB article that came out last year saying, despite this very high number of deaths, our roads are safer than ever. It's like, wait a second, how can that possibly be true? Like the other thing I was just thinking is about the liability thing, because I hear a lot of engineers say they can't build safer streets because they're worried about being sued. It's like, how does that make sense either? There's a huge disconnect. Like we're following standards and protocols that we know leads to unsafe places in order to protect ourselves from being sued. Like it should be the opposite. Like we should be looking to empirical results of where safety is and how we can achieve that and start heading more in that direction. So I think we also need to not just measure the right thing, but flip the liability part of the equation.
So there is an issue there, as as you've pointed out. So why has there been no concerted effort to update these guidelines and estimates for say lane widths, moving away from LOS like the ABCDEF grading to, especially for like urban arterials? Your speed on urban roads is not measured by are you zooming between at 40 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour between signals, but how much time you're actually spending at the intersections waiting 3-4 minutes. And Chuck, you mentioned this in your book. If you go at 15 miles an hour slowly, you actually, it's the same travel time because that's the average speed of a vehicle or a bicycle for that matter, right? So why is there no concerted effort to, you all have pointed it out in your books, and great, kudos to you, but we need more, right?
Yeah, I actually, I hope Wes answers this question too, because I feel like we have a different, not different perspective, but like a different, we have different, different perches where we're looking at this from. To me, I have watched engineers have reform, in a sense, crowded out by the amount of money we're willing to spend on dumb projects. Right now in my city, I've spent the last month writing a series of articles about this $58 million interchange that we're going to build. Most of the money, which is going to provide access to a handful of big box stores on the edge of the highway. The big box stores in total are worth less than the highway itself. Like we're actually spending more to provide access to businesses than those businesses are worth, but we're calling it growth and economic development. And what I'm watching is innovation squeezed out of the system because the engineers are actually getting more money to do things that are dumb than they are being rewarded in an application process and a grant process and a funding stream for doing things that are innovative and helpful. If you go into the city of Brainerd, like where I live, we're the same DOT is doing the same project through the middle of the city. And again, their emphasis is on how do we move traffic really quickly? How do we close intersections? How do we make the city less like a city and more like a suburban strip in order to improve traffic metrics, which is how they're judging success. the city value per acre is twice as much as the stuff you're getting out on the edge. It would not take much to make this a much more walkable, a much more successful place. But there's no metric that rewards that beyond the city's budget. And the city has nothing to say about how the state does this project. So I feel like a system that gave, in a sense, more authority and more responsibility to cities is one that we would get like a lot higher, a lot better outcomes out of.
I mean, so if I could expand on that, so why don't we see more pushbacks from cities? Because, hey, they can see I'm going to get more tax revenue if I don't do the, the thing on the fringe and invest more in in the core urban areas. And this is something, Donald Trump has spoken about, invest the money back into the parking money into your core urban areas as well. So why don't we see this pushback more often from cities? Say, okay, I don't want that fancy new project. I want you to invest the money, or I want to invest the money more in my core, improving my core urban areas.
I will try to answer that one, and I'll be quick. I feel like there is a psychological, downstream effect of what we did at the end of World War II. I do this thing with audiences all the time where I ask, what got us out of the Great Depression? And everybody in unison says World War II. That's insane. Tens of millions of people died in World War II. It was not a great period of time to live through. But if you're an economist, the great lesson that you take away with that is if we just stimulate the economy, all good things happen. It is really, really simple for us to pour money into highway spending, into highway expansions, into interchanges, into frontage roads, because you do get an immediate sugar high of GDP growth. What you don't get is long-term wealth creation and prosperity. And I think, we have to acknowledge we all live in like the cultural milieu of post-World War II thinking where all growth is good. And I think breaking out of that is a really hard thing to do, particularly when, this is essentially like a uniform consensus of the economics profession.
Okay, thanks for that. Leah, you shared, the pictures of Hoboken. It's a town I visit almost every year, and it's been heartening to see the changes. So those seem very, simple, incremental approaches. Why are we not seeing more of that in other towns? Is it because the communities don't want it? Is it is it a statewide mandate that needs to be met? Cities are not interested in it because, traffic islands, curb cuts, these are much easier to implement. So your thoughts on that?
I'm really glad you said that. That really is the case. Again, they're not doing some wholesale dramatic, and this is not meant to take away from their success, but they've not come in and done some dramatic thing. They're literally implementing things that work. Lower speed limits, speed humps, narrowing lanes, reducing travel lanes, adding more bike space, walk space, slowing. And let me pause. I'll be honest, I don't think we've talked about speed enough. And we probably, the three of us could have talked about speed for 8 hours, but what they're doing well, I think, in Hoboken and the places where we're seeing progress, a lot of the examples I shared in the US and elsewhere is they are literally saying safe mobility, moving people safely, is more important than fast mobility, speed. It is literally that. And then how do we do that? Here's some ways we do that. It's not rocket science. Now, the trick is, and you just alluded to it, why aren't more people doing it? I would say it's because our status quo in all the ways that we've been talking about is so set up for the speed piece, for the quote unquote convenience, but it's not so convenient to have 115 people dying every single day in this country in preventable traffic deaths, right? That is not convenient. But we're taught about, or we're kind of conditioned to look at the convenience of getting somewhere fast in a gigantic roomy vehicle where we can also watch a movie. But I think part of what we need, and let me kind of look to the more positive, is I think we need more regular people like me looking at the status quo and more books like Chuck's and Wes's and saying, but wait, but why, but why, but why? That doesn't make sense. I don't understand why we don't have a level of safety and not a level of service, right? So more conversations like this, more people literally asking why. And then what I would love to see is one community, and I'll throw this challenge out to everyone on the call, one community do everything in one neighborhood, or maybe it's the whole city, depending on the size. Do everything, do all the things. which we can do. Everything from lowering speed limits to quick build street designs to bringing in intelligent speed assistance for the most dangerous drivers to adding safety features on your own vehicles and all the fleet vehicles and all the fleet vehicles that contract with you, to Amazon, everyone. This is possible. Give our country a little microcosm or a big microcosm of what is possible. And I bet $100 that lots of other communities will want that same thing.
All right. I know the chat is absolutely on fire. So this is my last question before we move on to the audience question. Wes, you showed those images of that road in Colorado, and I was, just like, and then the study in Utah, was it, where the design was 35 and people were doing 75 because, the road just felt that safe that people were going that fast. So why we know this, that the wider roads, people go faster, you get a road diet going and people go at the speed limit. So why don't we just reduce width of roads? Isn't it like easy to do, easy to implement? Why do we need 13 feet wide lanes on city arterials, right?
Well, it goes against everything I was taught. I mean, coming up in this field. I mean, and like, even though the title of the book kind of goes hard at engineers, I'm not blaming them because they're doing what they were taught. Like, going back to my own experience, like as a young engineer, I'd got my civil engineering degree, but I'd only taken one transportation class. So when I started designing roads, all these 1,000-page books get plopped to my desk, and I have to. I mean, I went into that with the assumption that whoever wrote those books knows more than I did. I assumed that they had done their homework, they had done the research, and that when they said that the wider lanes were safer, that they were. And when I became disillusioned is when I started building stuff that didn't seem anything like my favorite places in Boston or Watertown. I started seeing the disconnect. So I had to kind of get over that hurdle and, start digging down those rabbit holes to start seeing that the science wasn't really there. But it's hard when, like, you're asking these professionals, like the engineers are the ones you're asking, like, whether or not we should widen these roads, and they're telling you that if you don't, then X, Y, and Z will happen. If you narrow these lanes, then something bad. So there's a fear that comes with, like, the way we present this stuff. Like, if we don't expand I-70 in Denver, we're going to get 20 hours of bumper to bumper traffic every day. Like, even though I could kind of go through the numbers and show you that's not true, that people will behave differently, it's hard. So I think it's hard for people to get over these hurdles. Also for the engineers to do so, because they were taught that these things are true. And I think it's hard to overcome that.
All right.
I do think that often we have static models as engineers when the world is like really dynamic. When the Highway 35W bridge went down in Minneapolis a couple decades ago, there was widespread, assumption that this would just make all commutes through the entire Minneapolis-St. Paul region grind to a halt. The reality is that commutes sped up and people got to where they were going more quickly. Why? Because humans adapted. Guess what? Your projection model that shows everyone's going to sit in traffic is clearly wrong because it doesn't take into account the fact that people will do different things. They'll go earlier, they'll go later, they'll carpool, they'll change destinations, they'll shift jobs, they'll live in different places. Engineers often act like we live in this like static bubble where everybody's like a sim player that can only respond in one dimension. People are complex, they adapt to many, many things. And I think the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can have transportation systems that actually respond to how people work.
Well, I mean, before I pass on to John, maybe with the growth of AI agents that can behave more like humans in making these choices, we might see transportation demand models that might respond better to some of these lane closures and bridge failures and things like that. Anyway, with that, let me pass it on to John, who has the daunting task of the audience questions.
Well, Bhuvan, you are correct in that the chat indeed was on fire. And I will point out, I think we peaked at around 460 participants today, which I believe is a record for the Mobility Forum. So great topic, fascinating discussion. Let me start with a question from Jordan Goldson. Just about 20 minutes in, asked, are there any suggestions on specific ways to distinguish between human error and bad road design? And I think I start with this question because it's really, I think, at the core of what we've been discussing. And there was a very long conversation in the chat about things like enforcement. What are the actual levers? Because we didn't talk about enforcement that much. So if you have ideas or contributions on the topic of enforcement, I would point out that I find it interesting that 9 states in the United States have effectively banned speed cameras, including 2 here in New England. So there, maybe if you have thoughts on that. Leah, you mentioned intelligent speed assistance, if you all have thoughts on that. So let's start with that sort of cluster of thinking, you know, this distinction between human error and road design, ways to distinguish. Any further thoughts? Why don't we start with Chuck?
So I'll share in the chat a link to our crash analysis studio. We established a couple of years ago this concept, and we've been modeling it for cities to adopt, of the crash analysis studio. And what we do is we look at fatal crashes and we try to identify all of the contributing factors. If you have a plane crash, or if you have a medical, procedure that doesn't go according to plan, nobody looks at those and says, well, who made the mistake? And let's point the finger at them. Who's the error here? What they do is they say, what were all the contributing factors? The pilot didn't get enough rest. The nurse in the hospital didn't fill out this form right. These are never single cause. And the thing is when there's a crash, we send out the police with a checklist. They've got 5 boxes they can check. Was it speeding? Was it distracted driving? Was someone impaired? And then someone goes out and sweeps up the mess. And then that's the analysis. We're done. And no one steps back and says, okay, a driver made a mistake, perhaps. A person walking made a mistake, perhaps. But what were the things that influenced that mistake, that error? What are the things that contributed to that? To me, a mature profession is one that is not forced to do that or pushed to do that. It's one that's asking the question. Oh, there is no medical doctor in the world who just has people routinely die on the operating table and says, well, they didn't exercise properly or they came in with a bad. They ask hard questions. What are the things that are causing this to happen over and over? That's what a mature profession does. And that's where we need to get to. And we established this crash analysis studio as a way to prompt that conversation.
Let me just quickly say, I'm so glad you brought up the aviation perspective, because it really is worth digging into how they look at safety, as you pointed out, versus, in terms of the road safety crowd. Leah, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I really think sometimes there's this either or, it's this or it's that. And of course it's not, right? It's not only design. It's not only behavior. It's not only enforcement. Of course, all these things come together. I think the bottom line though, and I've been watching some in the chat, people are saying, oh, what about the vehicle design? Of course, absolutely. Let me just say, I think, again, we could spend 12 hours or more on that. Of course, we all know vehicles are being supersized. It's insanely dangerous. As much as I love the idea of electric vehicles environmentally, they are heavier. They are a silent danger. It's a big worry, right? So let's not count these things out. We are dramatically behind in the US on all these fronts. But does that mean that we let off the hook other things? No, we need to work on all of them. And I'll put a challenge out right now that, what I think we're focusing mostly on road design here, right? This topic is meant to be that. So for the engineers, planners, and the policymakers who influence road design, it's kind of a basic choice of, do we create or redesign spaces that make the default choice a safer choice or a more dangerous choice? Right now, the default on most roads is the more dangerous, is the faster one, right? The default could be a safer drive, a safer walk. It is a choice. It might be a slightly slower one, but it's going to be a safer one. So one thing I would just say is, for those traffic engineers or planners that are maybe feeling a little bit hurt, understandably, maybe a little bit sensitive, and I hear you, because Wes's title it's a tough title. I love it. Tough title, right? But if you're feeling a little sensitive, I would say, how about getting your city to sign on to a push at the state level or the federal level to start using intelligent speed assistance in your community, to use automated speed safety cameras if they're not already. You can be part of other solutions. Just because we need the vehicle side, for instance, and other and enforcement issues changed, that doesn't take off the responsibility of changing the status quo on the design side. I would suggest they can do both ends.
And Leah, I love your point about the distinction between crashes and accidents. Language really does matter. It's something that we talk to our students about, and I think it's important to frame the conversation in that context. Wes, over to you.
So by no means am I suggesting that we shouldn't be placing blame on the bad actors in the road system when they do bad things. Like, that is a useful way to think about it for the police, for insurance companies. My point is, it is not useful for us as engineers or planners or people trying to make our streets safer. Like, we need to do what Chuck was saying and ask why these people were doing what they were doing. Try to see where and how engineering might play a role, how all the other things that, like, whenever a plane crash happens or a train crash happens, it's a national emergency, and we dive down all those rabbit holes. For us, with the crashes in the road system, it's more like, instead of a fire hose when a plane or train crashes, it's more like a dripping faucet. Like, we don't go out there with the same emergency to try to fix those problems. So if we have a different mindset and also treat these fatalities as if there's something we can do, we can start pushing in the right direction.
Yeah, hence the emphasis on the word preventable. I think we have time maybe just for one quick question, although it's not quick. The concept of autonomous mobility was brought up. Chuck, I know you had some thoughts on that. Do you have like just a 30-second on, hey, are autonomous vehicles going to save us?
So, two very quick things. One, if autonomous vehicles are safe enough where people can walk out in front of them and they'll stop, it will completely change our cities, because people are sick of waiting. I have to wait in 30-degree below weather for no cars just for a signal. I'm just going to cross, and it's going to change the relationship between cars and people. The other thing is that in order to make autonomous vehicles safe, what we found is that they have to drive slower. They're not going to be faster than human reaction in terms of perception. The way you get to safety is to slow it down. Why do we need autonomous vehicles to slow down traffic? We can do that now today and have all the safety gains of autonomous vehicles just by having slower designs in our cities. So what are we waiting for? Why do we have to wait for this magic technology to save us? Let's just do it now, because humans are actually pretty darn perceptible.
Great. Yeah, sorry to cut in here at time. About autonomous vehicle, in the future session this term, we'll have a designated discussion to continue this important conversation. Just to a quick summary, Chuck, your point about walking as a financial investment. Leah, your call to move from accident to crash is predictable, is preventable. Wes, I really like your thought of putting the names of engineers on the street and project on this, right? Yeah. On the flip side, when 40,000 people died, who got fired? Who felt ashamed, right? Put the name, put the pride onto that. So thank you so much, everybody. We join me, thank the panel, Leah, Chuck, and Wes for great conversation today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just a quick announcement for next week. We'll have Matt Farah, who's the host of a Smoke Tire video series podcast, talk about bridging the divide, car enthusiastic and transportation decarbonization. So everybody, have a good weekend. See you next Friday. Bye-bye. Yeah, Leah, Chuck, and Wes, if you stay just quickly, I'll create a breakout room for a quick debriefing here. Right. Okay, I just opened the room.
Okay.